Bolshevik impact on society 1918 to 1929. Religion. The Bolsheviks saw the church and the organized religion as a threat. The Russian Orthodox Church was seen as an instrument used to control society by the old Tsarist regime. They set the task of destroying the church and religion in Russia. Priests were saying that life under Tsarist rule was better as he was next to God, and that they should remain loyal to him despite their lives being better under Bolshevik rule. Marx said, "Religion is the opium of the people." Policy. A series of measures were introduced to limit religion's power and influence. 1918 Decree on Freedom of Conscience separated the church from the state, losing its privileges. It was deprived of its land without compensation, and its publications were outlawed, and religious teaching outside the home was banned. Churches were destroyed or converted to other purposes, such as storage and barns. Monasteries were closed. 1918 The head of the Russian Orthodox Church was under house arrest. This in total was the Bolsheviks creating a secular society, a society without religion. Positive and negative impact. The policy failed to stamp out religious influence completely. Mid-1920s revealed that 55% of peasantry were still active Christians, and attacks on churches were met with resistance by locals. After the Civil War, the Bolsheviks changed tactics slightly, using softer methods of reducing influence. They changed strategy to ridicule the church, which would mean that people would most likely move away from the church if they lost respect for the church. They used propaganda to ridicule religion as being superstitious. The Bolsheviks sponsored League of Militant Godless, which was active in spreading misinformation. The official policy was to attack religion and church, but at a local level there was often a more lenient approach, which meant that people were more likely to tolerate it. The local party branch of Smolensk decided that you could still believe in God and still be in the party. They were also wary on attacking Islam, which was strong in Central Asia. In conclusion, the power of the church was broken, but, despite the attacks, religious worship continued, though on a smaller scale. The political and economic influence of the church that was under Tsarist rule was now destroyed, but religious observance continued. Women and the family. Radical Bolsheviks considered the family to be an outdated bourgeois institution which had to be swept away. This was unlikely to be an official policy, but there was some attack on the idea of a traditional family by getting women and children to challenge the authority of the father figure and the parental figure. Policy. Party sections were set up to educate women to become more assertive and independent. Alexandra Kollontai, a Bolshevik, called for greater sexual freedom for women, but this was seen as shocking by the older, more traditional Bolsheviks such as Lenin, but was welcomed by younger Bolsheviks. Families in the housing blocks were encouraged to live communally, sharing cooking facilities. This made it easier for the government to spy on and make sure that there was no opponents or negative attitude towards the new regime. It also remolded the traditional family unit. Women were given new rights and freedoms. The Bolsheviks' family code of 1918 made divorce easier and abortion was made legal, and the setting up of daycare was encouraged. Russia had the highest divorce rate in Europe at this time. This would mean more children were likely to be abandoned. Positive and negative impact. There was some success. Divorce among the urban population increased, and by the mid-1920s, Russia had the highest divorce rate in Europe, and abortion was a commonplace in cities. However, the rise in divorce rate created problems. Women received little child support from their ex-husbands, and laws were giving women equal rights in employment and equal pay were slow to have an impact. There was a resistance to change in Muslim areas of Central Asia, where the polygamous, male-dominated families were well established. Bolsheviks didn't mess with Muslims. Bolshevik policies towards women had a practical basis. Women were needed to work during the Civil War. After the Civil War, many reforms were reversed, such as abortion becoming more restricted. There was an ironic situation in Bolsheviks' equality approach, as women represented only a small proportion of the party's elite members. Culture. 1917, the Bolsheviks were divided over the importance and direction of the cultural policy. While culture was important, it was not a priority during the Civil War. Lenin wanted to keep the artists and writers on side. Policy. Early on, Lenin set up a Commissariat of Enlightenment, a ministry of culture to support and encourage artists. Artists welcomed this support, especially since Lenin was prepared to tolerate artists who were not communist. They became known as fellow travelers. There were other Bolsheviks, like Alexander Bogdanov, who believed in the importance to create a new proletarian culture. They became known as constructivists. They believed a new group of artists from the working class and peasantry should be assembled, for whom art was to serve a social and political purpose. The Bolsheviks extended its influence over the cultural life of the country, and there was an increase in talented artists leaving Russia. This had a negative impact on the arts in general. Positive and negative impact. Art. Constructivist artists such as Vladimir Tatlin produced art that focused on machines of the future and emphasized the nobility of labor, focusing on the working man for art. Architecture. After the Civil War, plans were drawn up for garden cities and high-rise apartments. Buildings should be functional rather than aesthetically pleasing. Literature. Best works were produced by fellow travelers such as M. Sholokhov, with And Quiet Flows the Dawn, and the satirist E. Zamyatin's We influenced a regimented society where people were identified by only numbers. Science fiction was popular. Theatre. This was the Bolsheviks' strongest influence. Meyerhold produced Mystery Bouffe, 1918, which showed the proletariats defeating the bourgeois. Music. Musicians emigrated, but the emergence of the classical composer Shostakovich showed that talent could survive. They tolerated him because of how famous he was. Radio. The Bolsheviks set up loudspeakers in public places, factories and clubs. Control of the radio communications was done through the Commissariat for Posts and Telegraphs. Cinema. Lenin said, "Cinema is for us the most important of all arts." He recognized the popularity and how it could be used to promote political messages. The works of Sergei Eisenstein, being October and Battleship Potemkin, were propaganda successes.